I thought I was buying a horse. $12 counted out in coins that had been sweating in my palm for 40 miles, and a brisk nod from the old man who smelled like cedar smoke and wind. He said the mare was trail smart, the kind that wouldn't throw you when the sky turned mean over the mountains. I didn't ask more. A man with a deadline and an empty pocket doesn't haggle with luck. Dawn came on like a slow match, painting the pines copper. I lay in my canvas bedroll with frost on the seams and the taste of last night's coffee still bitter on my tongue. Somewhere close by, the mare cropped grass with the contentment of a creature that had no part in human trouble. I pushed up on one elbow, thinking about the pass, snow there by next week, maybe sooner, and the way a man could freeze to a secret if he tried to cross after that. I was counting my cartridges the way you count sins in church when I saw them. Two women stood at the edge of my camp, still as fence posts, watching me with the kind of patience you see on a hawk or a judge. One had a bundle tucked under her arm. The other carried nothing but the steady set of her shoulders. They were dressed for travel. Boots, wool, everything the color of dirt and weather. Their hair was braided tight, faces wind-burned and proud. I reached for the rifle without thinking. The older one clocked the movement, gave the slightest tilt of her head. No fear, just measurement, like she was deciding how much trouble I was. "Morning," I said, which is what you say in this part of the world when you don't know who's about to shoot first. "Morning," the older one answered. Her voice had music in it, a lilt from farther back than any map would show. "We come as part of arrangement." The words fell into the cold air with a heavy sound. Arrangement. I pushed myself upright, the blanket sliding from my shoulders. "I paid for a horse. That's all the arrangement I signed." The younger one's eyes flicked toward the mare, then back to me. She hadn't spoken yet, but her look had a weight to it. The older one nodded, almost courteous. "Yes, horse." She pointed at the grazing mare. "And us." Nothing in me moved for a second. Empty space and then a drop. "No," I said, slow and careful. "No one bought anyone. You should head back to wherever you came from." The older one stood there with the patience of rock. "We go with you 3 days," she said. "Then separate." A pause. "Or we all die here." I've heard men tell lies with that same calm tone, but I've never seen the truth sit straighter. The pine needles crackled under my boots as I stood. The younger one didn't flinch. Her hand brushed the handle of a knife tucked into her belt. Just a touch to make sure it was still there. The way you check a promise. The sun was climbing, staining the frost to wet. Somewhere a jay went to hollering like it had discovered a new sin. "Tell me your name," I said. "Ayana," the older one answered, with that careful lilt. She tipped her head toward the younger. "Kiona, my sister." "I'm Fletcher Knox," I said, "and I don't like walking blind into somebody else's business." She studied my face in a way that made me feel like the business might already be mine. "You leave for the pass today," she said, not asking. "That was my plan. Then we go. 3 days. After you choose your road." Her gaze cut toward the tree line. "Others choose theirs too." I stirred the coals with a stick and set the pot over what heat was left. The last of the grounds went in with a mean smell and a promise of grit. I poured 3 tin cups and handed them out. It seemed polite to let the coffee do a little talking while I got my feet under me. Ayana took a cautious sip and set the cup near her boot. Kiona held hers in both hands like it was the only warm thing in the world. Her eyes kept sliding to the east as if the horizon owed her money. "Your father sold me that mare," I said. "The old man at the post, with the cedar hands." Ayana's mouth tightened and softened at the same time. "Dakota," she said. "Yes." He didn't say anything about daughters. I let the steam hit my face. He barely said anything at all. "Words can be traps," she said. "Silence can be a bridge." "I'm not good at crossing things I can't see," I told her. "That is why he chose you." The camp went quiet then, a kind of quiet that has a pulse to it. I felt the hair lift on my arms under my shirt. In another life, another set of choices, I would have waved them off, saddled up, and ridden out with a belly full of coffee and a head full of selfish intentions. You get good at leaving if you practice hard enough. But I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't touch. And there was something in the way Kiona watched the trees, half fear, half calculation, that told me the decision had been made a long time before I woke up. 3 days, I said at last, tasting the bargain. "You tell me everything by sunset today, or I turn us around. I won't ride into an ambush because a stranger thinks I'm a good place to stash trouble. Ayana's shoulders dropped a fraction, like she'd been carrying a pack that suddenly remembered it had a bottom. Agreed, she said. We broke camp quick. I saddled the mare. Good back, steady eyes, a posture like she knew every rock from here to the big river. I named her nothing. Naming's a kind of claim, and I wasn't sure what belonged to me anymore. The sisters moved like people who'd learned the hard way about wasted motion. They folded blankets tight, checked their boots, tied their hair up shorter for riding. Ayana scanned the tree line every few seconds without making a show of it. Kiona kept her left hand free and near the knife. The choreography of fear and preparation looks the same in any language. By the time the sun shook itself loose from the trees, we were in the saddle and angling north on a deer track that pretended to be a trail when it had to. The morning smelled like wet iron and sap. My shoulder itched where the shirt seam rubbed a scar I didn't talk about. The mare stepped careful over roots that had been conspiring overnight. Our breath, human and horse, went fogging out and disappearing like we owed the cold a tax. You said we'd die if we didn't go, I said when the creak noise covered our talking. Who kills us? Ayana looked straight ahead. A man who takes what he wants because no one stops him. That's not a name. No, she said, it is a habit. Kiona made a sound that might have been a laugh if life had been gentler with her. You'll get the name, she said, finally letting some voice into the day. But names make echoes. We speak it when the tall rocks listen less. Fair, I said, fair as anything. We forded a shallow stretch of the creek where someone, elk maybe, had already broken the ice edge. The cold came through my boots, bit my toes, climbed my spine. On the far bank, the mare tossed her head and shook like a dog, and I couldn't help smiling. There's honesty in animal joy, the sort that makes a man think he might still learn something. Why me? I asked after we'd pushed through a stand of aspen that clicked their white fingers over our hats. There were a dozen men at that trading post who'd have sold their souls for a can of beans and a new pair of socks. Why tie your road to mine? Ayena's jaw set in a way I recognized. Truth debating whether it was safe to come outside. 2 winters ago, she said, near the ridge where the wind cuts in circles, you stood in front of a house while 12 men with drink and iron tried to send a family into the snow. You were outnumbered. You did not run. I didn't answer. I could still see the fire peeking out under the eaves that night, how the smoke slid low across the ground and turned the moon into nothing. I remembered the faces of men who thought fire was a better story than law. 3 of them were buried on the wrong side of a fence now. The family wasn't. Word travels, Kiona said, even when it walks. Word travels crooked, I muttered. Maybe, Ayana said, but sometimes it finds the right door. We climbed, the land pitching up into long ribs of rock. Somewhere a coyote stitched the hills together with its voice. I let the mare pick her way without telling her how. That's a lesson I learned late. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is admit the animal knows the road better than you. By midday, we'd eaten the last of a biscuit I'd been pretending was fresh. The sky had gone high and thin, the kind that makes you feel like the world's a big bowl turned upside down, and you're rattling around the bottom looking for the part where it curves up into mercy. We topped a ridge and let the horses breathe while the wind tried to pry us off the earth. 3 days, I reminded Ayana. Sun's past half, start talking. She took a breath that looked like it cost her. A man named Gideon Pratt, she said, and the way she said it put a burr under the syllables. He buys land with money first. When money fails, he buys with fear. When fear fails, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Your father's land has water, Kiona added, almost proud through her worry. A river that remembers how to run even when the sky forgets. I'd heard the name. Sure I had. You can spend enough nights in enough bad rooms and the villains start to rhyme. Pratt had been a rumor in saloons. Laughter that didn't reach eyes, a heavy wallet that moved other people's fences. Erasing folks with contracts where bullets would be too loud, and sometimes not bothering with contracts at all. Why send you? I asked, and it came out sharper than I meant. Why send his daughters with a stranger like me? Ayana's answer took a long time to arrive. Because we are not for sale, she said, and because he heard you were not either. That shut me up for a mile or two. The country folded and unfolded at our feet. Hills like shrugged shoulders, gullies like frowns. I kept checking our back trail without turning my head. A man learns to watch corners of his own vision after a while. It makes you less surprising to the people who want to put a hole in you. Not long after we dropped into a draw choked with chokecherry, Kiona hissed through her teeth, a sound a person makes before their mind decides whether to be afraid. She nudged her pony with a knee, and it slid behind a stand of scrub. Ayana's hand found my sleeve and pinched once. I followed her eyes across the draw to the far slope, where the sun laid everything flatter except the horse shape at the top. A single rider sat there like a pin in a map. Too far to count buttons, but close enough to count trouble. We keep moving like we don't see him, I said low. Anyone worth a damn at watching wants to be watched watching. We can't outrun 7, Kiona muttered. Good thing I only see 1, I said, and gave the mare her head. We didn't look back. Not once. Which is a kind of performance you put on for the man who thinks he's puppeteering you. My mouth went dry as old chalk. The past felt farther away than it had that morning. My deadline stretched thin across a new problem I hadn't planned for. The way you stretch a blanket too small across a winter night. We made a hard right up a cut the wind had carved. Footholds like arguments. Loose rock trying to make a lyre of gravity. Every step scraped a new sentence onto my nerves. When we topped out, I dared a glance. The ridge where the rider had been was empty now. That felt worse. The afternoon wore itself out slower than a sermon. The light went the color of brass, and the breath out of the horses puffed like signals we didn't know how to read. Ayana kept scanning. Kiona's jaw worked like she was chewing on a prayer she didn't want to say out loud. Me, I took inventory. 12 rounds in the rifle, a half-wicked pocket knife, one shoulder that complained when I asked it to remember it was part of me. We make camp before dark, I said. Not because I like stopping, but because people who chase at night get clumsy, and clumsy is the only friend we have. Ayana nodded. Kiona didn't. I couldn't tell if that meant she agreed or just didn't waste her nods on strangers. We found a little bowl cut into the slope, 3 sides of rock and a narrow mouth. It wasn't perfect. Perfect gets you killed. It teaches you to expect more of the world than it owes, but it would give us a wall at our backs and angles in our favor. I gathered wood that would burn hot and low, the kind that doesn't whistle our position all the way to hell. The women laid out blankets, checked straps, set their few belongings where they could grab them without looking. 3-day, I said again, mostly to the fire. We start the hard part tomorrow. Ayana eased down beside the flames. The light turned her face into a map of places she'd endured. No, she said, and she didn't smile. The hard part started when you counted $12 and believed it was enough. The night rose up around us, full of the noises that keep a man honest about how small he is. Owls stitching darkness to distance, the restless shift of a horse, the far-off crack of a branch that might be a deer and might be a decision coming closer. I settled my back to the rock and let the rifle rest across my knees. The fire's heat kissed my palms in little apologies for everything it had burned to get there. I closed my eyes and saw the rider on the ridge again. The way stillness can be a kind of threat. Somewhere below that memory, deeper than fear, something else had woken up. A feeling I hadn't courted and didn't trust. Responsibility. A rope thrown from someone else's sinking wagon, landing across my shoulders like it knew my size. I opened my eyes, found the sisters by the firelight. Ayana, carved out of will, Kiona, coiled and ready, both of them staring into the coals like they could read a future there. The mare snorted and settled. My breath slowed to match the mountains. Sleep, I said to them or to myself, I wasn't sure. We ride at first light. First light, Ayana echoed. Before the tall rocks listen, Kiona murmured, and her smile, brief and tired, was the first soft thing I'd seen all day. I leaned my head back against the cold stone and let the night keep watch with me. I'd thought $12 bought me a horse. Turned out I'd bought a ticket onto a road that had been waiting for me longer than I cared to admit. The pass would still be there tomorrow, and so would whatever rode our shadow from that ridge. Between the two, a man could learn what he was made of and who he belonged to besides himself. The night had left its fingerprints on the canyon, smoke curling lazy from the last coals, dew slicking the saddle leather. When I woke, the air had that brittle quiet you only get before sunrise in high country. Kiona was already up, crouched by the fire with a knife and an apple, slicing it like she had all the time in the world. Ayana stood a few yards off, watching the ridge we'd come down yesterday. She hadn't slept much. You could tell by the way she held herself. Ready, like her nerves hadn't found a place to sit yet. I poured what passed for coffee, black enough to scare daylight, and offered the pot their way. We got miles to burn before the sun decides to cook us, I said. Ayanna nodded, not breaking her gaze from the horizon. He knows where we are now. He being this Gideon Pratt you mentioned yesterday? Her eyes flicked toward me. If you've heard the name, you already know. I've heard the stories, I admitted. Half the saloons from here to Deadwood have some poor bastard telling ghost tales about Pratt. Land baron, claims stealer, worse things. I stirred the fire with my boot heel. Never thought I'd be on his guest list. Kiona spoke without looking up from the apple. No one thinks they are until it's too late. We broke camp fast. Quiet hands, efficient motions. That's what fear does when it sticks around long enough. Turns into muscle memory. The horses snorted in the chill as we rode out, frost cracking beneath their hooves. The day opened wide and empty, the plains stretching out like a forgotten promise. I rode a few lengths ahead, scanning the skyline. Nothing moved but wind. Still, I couldn't shake the sense of eyes out there, behind every rise, under every shadow. By mid-morning, the land started folding into low hills. Good country for an ambush if you had patience and bad intentions. I slowed the mare, raised a hand for the sisters to hold back. Stop a minute, I said. Let's take a look at what we're riding into. Ayanna reined in beside me. The wind caught a strand of her hair, and she brushed it away with the same irritation a soldier might swat a fly. He'll send scouts first. 1 or 2 men who know the country. They'll track us without getting close until nightfall. I studied her face. You sound sure. He's done this before, she said. Our cousin tried to run 2 months ago. Pratt sent 1 man after her. Only 1. He brought her back on a rope. Her voice didn't break. That was somehow worse. Kiona looked down, her hand tightening on the reins. She was 16. I felt my stomach twist. Then we don't give them the chance. We took a side trail that wound into a stand of pines thick enough to hide a man or lose one. The scent of sap and old rain hung heavy. Every sound, hoof scrape, leather creak, my own breathing, felt louder than it should have. You ever think your father set you up for something you didn't ask for? I said after a while, not sure why the words left my mouth. Ayanna glanced over, one eyebrow raised. That's a strange question from a man who rides with strangers. Maybe, I said, but I've seen that look before. Someone asked you to be brave for their sake? She smiled, thin as smoke. Maybe someone had to. The trail curved along a ridge that looked down into a long, dry valley. Out there, the wind carved dust devils that danced across the flats like restless spirits. I squinted against the glare and saw something that didn't fit. A flash of light near a patch of dead sage. Metal-catching sun. A rifle barrel, maybe. Down, I hissed. We slid from the saddles using the slope for cover. I pulled the rifle from its scabbard and eased forward until I could see the spot again. Nothing moved now, just the shimmer of heat. But my gut said we weren't alone. Kiona whispered, You see him? Not sure, I said, but someone's there. You 2 stay behind this ridge. If anything happens, you ride north till the river splits in 2. Don't look back. Ayanna frowned. And leave you here? That's the idea. Her jaw set. We stay together. I'm not debating. You're not my father, she cut in. You want to help us, you don't get to die doing it. I bit back the retort that came next. There was fire in her voice and not the kind that asked permission. The shot came before either of us could move. A sharp crack, echoing off the stone. Dirt jumped half a foot from Kiona's boots. Go, I barked, shoving Ayanna toward the horses. I took another look over the ridge, just enough to catch a glimpse of a man pulling back behind the sage. Dark hat, dark coat. The kind of man who didn't miss twice. I fired once just to remind him I was awake, and ducked. We need the canyon. We ran for the horses. Bullets snapped through branches, spitting bark. The mare reared, half wild with panic, but she obeyed when I grabbed the reins. Kiona swung onto her pony like she'd been doing it since birth. Ayanna followed, fast and clean. We bolted down the ridge, hooves pounding, the air alive with the whine of lead. My heart kicked like a hammer trying to break through my ribs. Behind us, another shot, then silence. When we reached the canyon's mouth, I reined in. My ears rang from the noise, but the quiet that followed was worse. Too sudden, too deliberate. They'll follow the tracks, I said. Then we make them wish they hadn't, Ayanna replied. We pushed into the canyon, narrow walls rising like a throat closing around us. It was a gamble. If they caught us inside, we'd have nowhere to run. But at least here the sun couldn't see us. Halfway through, we stopped near a bend where the rock walls formed a kind of pocket. The air smelled like dust and old water. I dismounted, checking the rifle. "They'll come slow," I said. "Cautious. Maybe send one man to test if we're still breathing." Ayanna crouched beside me, eyes scanning the shadows. "We can take one." I looked at her. "You shoot?" She pulled a revolver from her saddlebag, spun the chamber once. "My father taught us. Said the frontier only respects two things: strength and the will to use it." "Smart man." Kiona sat close by, hugging her knees, her knife in hand. Her eyes flicked from me to Ayanna. "He taught us to survive, not to kill," she said softly. Ayanna's mouth tightened. "Sometimes they're the same." We waited. 10 minutes, maybe more. Long enough for my muscles to ache and the sun to crawl higher up the canyon wall. Then I heard it. The soft scrape of rock on boot. I motioned for silence. Ayanna nodded, cocking the revolver. The first man appeared around the bend, crouched low, rifle ready. His hat shadowed most of his face, but I could see the smirk, one of those grins men wear when they think they've already won. He didn't even get to aim. I squeezed the trigger, the shot cracked, and he dropped like a sack of wheat. Echoes chased each other down the canyon. For a second, nothing. Then the shouting started. "Get around them," someone yelled. "He's not alone!" I grabbed Ayanna's arm. "Back to the horses, now!" We scrambled up the canyon floor. Bullets clanged off rock behind us. One grazed my sleeve, burning the skin underneath. Kiona's pony spooked but didn't bolt. The mare's breath came hot and heavy, foam streaking her neck. We made it to the canyon's end, where the walls opened into a wide basin of scrub and broken stone. My lungs burned. We couldn't keep this up. "There!" Kiona pointed toward a slope of shale leading to higher ground. We drove the horses hard, climbing through loose rock and thorny brush until the gunfire faded behind us. By the time we reached the ridge, the world had gone quiet again, except for our ragged breathing. Ayanna swung down first, helping Kiona dismount. She turned to me. "You're hit." "Just a scratch," I lied. My arm throbbed where the bullet had kissed it. We found shelter under a ledge of red stone. I sank against it, letting the cold seep through my back. Ayanna tore a strip from her shawl, pressed it to my arm. "You're lucky," she said. "If he'd been a better shot—" "Yeah," I said, forcing a grin. "But then he wouldn't be working for Pratt." That got a small laugh out of her, the kind that slips past exhaustion. Kiona leaned against her sister, eyes distant. "He won't stop, will he?" Ayanna shook her head. "Not until we reach the border. Not until he knows we're gone." I flexed my hand, testing the arm. It hurt like hell, but it worked. "Then we keep moving. We've still got daylight and 2 miles of bad country before the pass." Ayanna met my eyes. "You could leave. You owe us nothing." I looked out over the valley, the sun bleeding into the horizon. "Yeah," I said quietly, "but I'd have to live with that." For a while, none of us spoke. The wind whistled through the rocks, carrying the faint scent of sage and blood. Somewhere behind us, far off, a hawk screamed. It sounded like a warning, or maybe a challenge. I took a breath and stood, tightening the bandage. "Let's ride before the night catches up." Ayanna nodded, helped her sister to her feet. The three of us mounted up again, moving toward the fading light. As we rode, I realized something had shifted. It wasn't just me helping them anymore. It was us. 3 people tied together by a deal none of us fully understood, running from a man who'd turned greed into a religion. The trail ahead wound toward the mountains, the air thin and sharp. The mare's ears flicked back as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Maybe she was. I thought about Dakota, about that deal we'd made, $12 for a horse, and how cheap it had sounded at the time. Now it felt like a down payment on something much bigger. Night was coming fast, and so was whatever followed us. "Keep riding," I said. "We make camp when the stars are the only witnesses." And under my breath, quieter than a prayer, I added, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The wind picked up just after sundown, bringing with it that dry, restless whisper you hear before trouble. The canyon below us looked like a wound carved into the earth. Deep, narrow, and too quiet. We'd made camp there the night before when we were running, and now we were back again, this time by choice. Ayanna didn't like it. "You're leading us into a trap," she said flatly, standing beside her horse. The setting sun threw copper light on her face, catching the stubborn set of her jaw. "Maybe," I said, tightening the saddle straps, "but I'd rather choose the trap than walk into someone else's." She looked at me like she wanted to argue, but there wasn't much left to say. Behind her, Kiona adjusted the rifle sling across her chest. The younger sister's eyes were red from exhaustion, but she hadn't complained once. Tough girl. Too young to look that hard. We moved into the canyon before night swallowed the last of the color from the sky. The horses' hooves crunched softly on the gravel. Above, the cliffs rose in jagged silhouettes that looked ready to fall if the wrong word was spoken. When we found the pocket, I remembered, a narrow bend shielded on three sides by rock. I nodded. Here, I said. If they want us, they'll have to come from the front. It's the only way in. Ayana dismounted, scanning the ridgeline. And if they come from above? I looked up. The cliffs were steep, sure, but not impossible to climb if a man was desperate. Then we shoot faster, I said, or die loud enough that the mountains remember us. Her expression didn't change, but a flicker of grim amusement crossed her eyes. You joke too easily about dying. Only because I've spent so much time practicing for it. We set the fire small and low, just enough to take the bite out of the night. The flame painted our faces in golden shadow. Somewhere outside the canyon, a coyote called, long, lonesome, like it knew the kind of story we were in. Kiona sat cross-legged near the fire, cleaning her knife with slow, deliberate strokes. Ayana loaded her revolver, then placed it beside her on the ground. I checked my rifle again. 12 rounds. That's all I had. You've done this before, Ayana said quietly. Done what? Waited for men to come kill you. I thought about the miners at Silver Ridge, about the night smoke had poured out of the cabin I defended, and about the faces of the ones who hadn't lived to see dawn. Yeah, I said. Once or twice. She nodded like that was all she needed to know. Then you know what comes next. The canyon fell silent again, except for the crackle of the fire and the restless shifting of the horses. The stars above us came out one by one, clean and sharp against the dark. Then came the sound. Soft at first, but close enough that every instinct in me went rigid. Hooves. I gestured for the women to douse the fire. Ayana kicked sand over the coals, plunging us into darkness. The air turned heavy. Voices drifted down the canyon, men talking low, their laughter echoing just enough to make your skin crawl. 4, maybe 5, I whispered. No light. They're confident. Ayana's hand brushed mine in the dark. We stand. We wait, I said. The voices grew clearer as the men drew closer. They weren't in a hurry. Why would they be? To them, we were cornered prey. The first voice called out, smooth and friendly as a snake oil salesman. Evening, Knox. Heard you picked up some company that don't belong to you. I didn't answer. You hand over the girls, the voice continued, and maybe we let you ride out of here with your skin. Pratt's a fair man when he's in a good mood. Ayana tensed beside me. I shook my head slightly. Not yet. The voice went on, almost laughing now. $12 for a horse, that's what they say you paid. Guess you didn't read the fine print. These two came with the saddle. Kiona's breath hitched, and I felt the anger rise like heat in my chest. Tell Pratt, I called back. He's got bad handwriting. The deal's been amended. The laughter stopped. A beat of silence. Then another voice, harsher. We can do this nice or messy, cowboy. Don't matter much to us either way. I could feel Ayana's eyes on me in the dark, waiting for my call. Messy suits me fine, I said, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the muzzle flash lighting the canyon walls for a heartbeat. One man went down hard, his rifle clattering against the rock. Chaos followed. Shouts, gunfire, the echo of boots scrambling for cover. Bullets sparked off stone, whining past my ear. Stay low, I yelled. Ayana returned fire, calm and precise. The revolver barked twice, and I heard another man curse. Kiona ducked behind a boulder, clutching her knife, wide-eyed but steady. The canyon became a thunderstorm of sound. Gunfire bouncing between the walls, smoke choking the air. I fired again, felt the recoil hammer my shoulder. A bullet grazed the rock beside my head, spraying grit across my face. Then everything went still. For a long moment, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears and the rasp of my own breath. 2 down, I whispered. Rest will be waiting us out. Ayana wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. They won't wait long. Pratt pays for results. He'll be paying funerals if they rush us, I said. Kiona crawled closer, trembling but trying not to show it. How many bullets you got? Enough, I lied. She looked at me, knowing better. We can't win. We don't have to win, I said. We just have to make it to morning. Ayana shifted her weight. Morning changes nothing. It changes how easy they can see us, I replied. The wind shifted then, carrying with it a smell I knew too well, horses and sweat and oil. The rest of Pratt's men were moving in, silent this time. Professionals. I glanced up the canyon wall, and a thought came like lightning. There, I said, pointing to a narrow crack that climbed toward the ridge. You two go, I'll cover you. Ayanna stared at me. You won't make it. Wasn't planning on making it easy for them either. Kiona shook her head, panic flashing in her eyes. We're not leaving you. I grabbed her shoulder, firm but gentle. You want your father to get his land back? You want Pratt to pay for what he's done? Then you go. You take the proof. You make it mean something. Ayanna hesitated only a second longer before nodding. You have 60 seconds, she said. She turned to her sister. Climb. The sisters moved fast, their boots scraping against stone. I reloaded, the motions automatic. My heartbeat slowed to something cold and steady. When I saw the first shadow move along the canyon floor, I took aim and fired. The shot exploded in the dark. The man dropped. The rest opened up all at once, muzzle flashes lighting the canyon like lightning. I dove behind a rock, bullets tearing into the dust around me. The rifle grew hot in my hands. I fired again, then again. One round caught a man in the leg. He fell screaming. My shoulder burned where something heavy and fast had grazed it. The pain came sharp and bright, but I stayed up long enough to cover Ayanna's climb. Go, I shouted. Her voice echoed back, strained but alive. Fletcher! Don't stop, I yelled. Don't. Movement to my right. A man breaking from the shadows, knife glinting. I turned, too slow. The blade caught my ribs, shallow but deep enough to steal my breath. I swung the rifle like a club, cracking it across his jaw. He went down hard. Blood soaked through my shirt, hot against the cold air. I staggered back, forcing myself toward the canyon wall. Above me, Kiona was reaching down, hand outstretched. Fletcher! I'm coming, I gasped, grabbing the rock with my good arm. The world tilted and blurred, but I climbed anyway. Behind me, someone shouted orders. Pratt's men regrouping. Halfway up, a shot rang out, splintering stone inches from my face. I felt another bullet tear through my sleeve. Then Ayanna's hand grabbed mine, strong and desperate. Hold on! She and Kiona hauled me up the last few feet. I collapsed on the flat ground, the sky spinning overhead. My shoulder was bleeding again, but I was breathing. Below us, the canyon flickered with torchlight. The men were spreading out, searching. They'd find the trail soon. Ayanna knelt beside me, pressing a cloth against the wound. You're losing too much blood. Not enough to matter yet, I said. My voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. Kiona crouched near the edge, peering down. They'll follow. Let them, I said. We'll make the ridge by dawn. After that, Pratt's got no power where we're going. Ayanna tied the bandage tighter, her hands steady despite the tremor in her breath. You saved us again. I met her eyes, managed a smile that hurt. Don't start keeping score. I'm bad at losing. The wind howled through the pass like a warning. Below, torchlight danced and died in the shadows. Above us, the stars burned bright and cold, as if watching to see what kind of story we were going to write next. We rode through the night, slow but steady, following the faint silver line of the river toward the mountains. The world felt smaller, sharper, like everything that mattered had narrowed down to 3 riders, 1 trail, and the man waiting at the end of it. I could still taste the gunpowder in the back of my throat, still feel the echo of that canyon in my chest. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure. Gideon Pratt hadn't seen the last of me. By dawn, the wind had gone sharp enough to cut skin. We'd made it out of the canyon alive, but barely. The horses were running on nerves, and I wasn't much better. My shoulder throbbed every time the mare stumbled, and the bandage Ayanna had tied was already dark with blood. We rode until the sun started to crawl over the ridge, washing the rocks in a pale, unforgiving light. From up there, the whole valley stretched out below us, wild, quiet, endless. It should have felt like freedom, but it didn't. The silence was wrong, too heavy. Ayanna must have felt it too. She slowed her horse beside mine. He's out there, she said. Who? I asked, though I already knew. Pratt. Her tone was flat, the name dropping like a stone between us. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that men like Pratt didn't dirty their boots chasing people through canyons. But deep down, I knew better. A man like him doesn't rest easy when someone slips through his fingers, especially not when his pride's on the line. Kiona glanced over her shoulder. We can make the pass by noon, she said. After that, She didn't get to finish. A rifle cracked from the ridge ahead. The sound bounced across the valley like thunder. Kiona's pony reared, nearly throwing her. I saw dust explode from the rock near her saddle horn. Down, I shouted. We slid off the horses, scrambling for cover behind a scatter of boulders. Another shot came, closer this time. The bullet sparked against stone, spraying my cheek with grit. Ayana cursed under her breath. He found us. I risked a glance toward the ridge. That's when I saw him, sitting tall on a black stallion, the rising sun painting him in golden blood. Even from that distance, I could see the shape of his smile. Gideon Pratt. He looked exactly like the story said he would. Clean-shaven, well-fed, dressed like a man who believed the world was already his. His coat was tailored, his boots polished, even out here in the dust. That alone made me hate him more. He raised a hand and the shooting stopped. Well, I'll be damned, Pratt called out, his voice carrying easy across the distance. The famous Fletcher Knox, the $12 cowboy. I didn't answer. I've been eager to meet you, he said. Not every man has the courage or the stupidity to stand between me and what's mine. Maybe you ought to rethink what's yours, I shouted back. Pratt laughed, deep and rich, like a man enjoying a private joke. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But it's wasted on the losing side. He nodded toward the slope behind us. I turned just in time to see movement. 6 riders cresting the hill, rifles in hand. His men had circled around during the night. We were boxed in. Ayana's knuckles went white on her revolver. We fight, she said. I looked at her. At the set of her jaw, the fear she refused to show. I wanted to believe courage was enough, but courage doesn't stop bullets. No, Kiona pulled something from her coat pocket, clutching it tight. Fletcher, she said softly, if they get us, take this and run. She held out a folded piece of paper, edges frayed from travel. What's this? Proof, Ayana said before her sister could answer. Our father's records, every acre of land Pratt stole, every person he buried to keep it quiet. I stared at the paper, understanding dawning like a slow punch to the gut. That's what this was all about, I said. Not just survival. You were carrying this the whole time. Ayana nodded once. Our father knew Pratt would come. He knew we couldn't fight him with guns. So he gathered evidence, witnesses, documents, enough to hang him twice over. I turned the paper over in my hand, feeling the weight of it. He sent you to me. Yes, Ayana said quietly. He heard what you did at Silver Ridge. He thought maybe, if anyone could be trusted with the truth, it would be you. For a moment I couldn't breathe. $12 for a horse. That's what I thought the deal was. But the truth of it, the real price, was sitting right there in my hand. Pratt's voice echoed again. Let's not drag this out, Knox. You can't win. Give me the girls and that paper, and I'll let you die with some dignity. I stood slowly, using the boulder for balance. You've got a strange definition of dignity. He tilted his head, smiling like a man who'd never been told no. I have men on both sides. You have 2 half-starved horses and a gun that's nearly empty. Think it through. Ayana whispered, don't listen to him. I'm not, I said. I'm thinking of something else. I raised my voice. Tell me, Pratt, what's a man like you afraid of? You've got land, money, power, but you rode out here yourself. Why? That smile slipped for just a heartbeat. I pressed harder. Because if that paper gets to the marshal, everything you built turns to dust. That's why. Pratt's face hardened. You won't live long enough to deliver it? Maybe not, I said, but someone will. He drew his gun. Last chance. Funny, I said. I was about to say the same thing. Before he could answer, I threw the paper to Ayana. Ride north, I said. Don't stop until you find the town. What about you? She demanded. I'll buy you time. Kiona shook her head. You can't go, I barked. That's an order, and I ain't your father, but it'll have to do. Ayana hesitated, eyes burning, then grabbed her sister's hand. We'll come back for you. I'll hold you to it, I said. They mounted and kicked hard, the horses bolting toward the open plain. The moment they moved, Pratt shouted, Shoot them! Gunfire erupted. I fired back, not aiming to kill, just to distract. Bullets hissed past me, chipping rock, splitting air. One of Pratt's men fell from his saddle. Another's horse reared and threw him. I dropped behind a boulder as a round grazed my thigh. Ayana and Kiona were halfway down the slope, dust rising around them like smoke. I reloaded my last 2 rounds and fired again, forcing Pratt to pull his horse aside. He shouted something I couldn't hear, his voice lost in the chaos. Then another shot tore through my leg, sending me to my knees. The rifle slipped from my hands. Through the pain, I saw Ayana glance back once before disappearing into the low hills. The sound of their horses faded, replaced by the pounding of Pratt's stallion as he rode toward me. He stopped 10 feet away, dismounted with slow, deliberate grace. His men fanned out behind him, rifles ready but unused. He wanted this personal. He crouched in front of me, brushing dust from his sleeve like we were two men meeting at a bar instead of on the edge of hell. "You put up a good fight," he said, "but all wars end the same way. The man with the most bullets wins." I spat blood at his boots. "Then I guess you're outnumbered." He smiled thinly. "You think your little act of martyrdom matters? They won't get far." "You sound worried," I said. For the first time, his composure cracked. "You have no idea what I can do," he hissed. "Maybe not," I said, "but I know what you can't do anymore." He frowned. "What's that?" "Erase people." Something shifted behind us, a sound like distant thunder. Pratt turned, confused. Then we saw them. Riders, a dozen or more coming fast from the north. Sunlight flashed on rifles and badges. The settlers. Pratt's smile vanished. The first voice that carried across the valley was rough and familiar. "That's far enough, Pratt." I recognized him. The old man from Silver Ridge, Samuel Briggs, the one whose family I'd saved years ago. "This is free territory," Samuel shouted. "You're trespassing." Pratt's jaw clenched. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns anyone who's lost something to you," Samuel said. "And that's just about everyone here." For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind Pratt's eyes. He looked back down at me, voice low and venomous. "This isn't over." I smiled through the blood. "Yeah, it is." He mounted his horse and wheeled it around, shouting for his men to retreat. But you could tell by their faces, they knew the tide had turned. Money doesn't buy loyalty when death's the cheaper deal. As Pratt rode off, I sagged back against the rock, every nerve screaming. Ayana and Kiona were gone, free for now. The settlers had come, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe maybe, just maybe, the right side could win. Above me, the sun burned hot and high. The world smelled like dust, sweat, and the faint promise of justice. I closed my eyes and whispered, $12, huh? Hell of a bargain." The world came back to me in pieces. Light, sound, pain. I woke to the smell of smoke and the steady hum of voices. My vision was a blur of motion, people moving around me, the faint sound of horses, someone boiling water over a fire. When the haze cleared, I saw Ayana sitting beside my bedroll, her face streaked with soot and exhaustion. "You're awake," she said softly. Her voice trembled, but her smile didn't. "Guess I'm too stubborn to die," I murmured. My throat was dry as sand. "Where are we?" "A homesteader's cabin," she said. "Samuel brought us here after the fight. You've been out for 3 days." 3 days, I groaned, trying to sit up. A lance of pain shot through my ribs and shoulder, reminding me I was still more scar than man. Ayana pressed a hand against my chest. "Don't move too fast," she said. "You lost a lot of blood." Kiona entered the cabin then, carrying a pot of stew that smelled like heaven and gunpowder mixed. She looked different now. Tired, yes, but freer somehow. The kind of freedom you only see on people who've survived the storm. "Samuel's people are watching the roads," she said, setting the pot down. "The marshal came yesterday. He took the papers." "And Pratt?" I asked. Ayana's eyes darkened. "Gone. His men scattered when the settlers showed up. The marshal sent word. Pratt tried to cross into Mexico. There was a fight. He didn't make it." I let the words settle. Pratt. Gone. After all that running, all that blood, the man who'd built an empire on fear had finally met something he couldn't buy. Ayana saw the look in my eyes and said quietly, "It's over." "Is it?" I asked. "Or does a man like him ever really die? Seems like there's always another Pratt waiting for the next chance." She didn't answer, and maybe she didn't have to. Some things outlive the men who start them. Outside, I could hear children laughing, someone hammering wood, the sounds of people rebuilding what had been broken. Samuel's settlement was growing. Half settlers, half of Dakota's people now. The kind of thing nobody would have thought possible before all this. Later that afternoon, Samuel himself came to see me. The old man looked older than I remembered, but his eyes still carried that hard spark of survival. "Well, if it ain't the $12 cowboy," he said with a grin. "You caused quite a stir out here." I chuckled weakly. Didn't plan on it. Things worth doing seldom are planned, he said. He handed me a folded paper. That's a copy of what you helped deliver. The evidence your girls carried. Marshall's got the original. This one's for you. I unfolded it. The writing was smudged, the ink faded in places, but the names hit me like thunder. People Pratt had ruined, families erased by greed. There were signatures too, people who'd found the courage to speak after years of silence. Samuel put a hand on my shoulder. You didn't just stop one man, Knox. You reminded folks what standing up looks like. I looked down at the paper again, at all those names. I didn't do it alone, I said. No one ever does, he said, and tipped his hat before heading back outside. That night, the settlement held a small gathering. Bonfire crackling, kids running barefoot through the dust, people laughing like the sound itself was new. Dakota arrived just after sundown, riding slow, his horse decorated with painted feathers and old prayers. He dismounted stiffly, and when his eyes found Ayanna and Kiona, his face broke into a smile that could have lit the prairie. He embraced them both, his big hands shaking. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he turned to me. You did not owe us anything, he said, yet you carried our hope like it was your own. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Hope's a hard thing to carry, Chief, but it's lighter when you share it. He nodded, studying me for a moment. My people have a saying, he said. A deal made in desperation can still be a sacred one. I laughed softly. Guess I never thought $12 could mean so much. It was never about the money, he said. It was about trust. The fire crackled between us, sparks lifting into the night. Around the flames, settlers and tribesmen shared food, songs, and tired smiles. It was strange and beautiful in a way words couldn't catch. A kind of fragile peace, the kind you only earn after too much loss. Later, when the night had quieted and the stars were bright enough to touch, Ayanna found me sitting alone near the edge of the camp. The moonlight turned her hair silver, her face soft. You're leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. Tomorrow, I said. I don't stay in one place too long. Never have. She folded her arms. You could. Stay, I mean. This land needs men who don't run. I smiled faintly. That's the problem. Running's about the only thing I've ever been good at. You're lying, she said gently. You're good at standing up, too. We sat in silence for a while. The fire behind us burned lower, and the night sounds took over. The cry of an owl, the rustle of wind in the grass, the soft breathing of a land learning how to sleep again. I used to think a man was only worth what he could hold on to, I said finally. Money, land, reputation. But somewhere between the bullets and the blood, I started thinking maybe a man's worth is measured by what he's willing to lose. Ayanna looked at me for a long time, her eyes shining. You lost enough for 10 men, she said. Maybe, or I said, but I gained something too. She waited. Purpose, I said simply. Didn't know I was missing it until your father tricked me into finding it. Ayanna smiled, a real one this time, soft and unguarded. Then his gamble was worth it. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded. When dawn came, I saddled the same mare I'd bought all those miles ago. She was stronger now, her coat shining in the morning light. Ayanna and Kiona stood beside their father, watching. Dakota stepped forward, placing something in my hand. It was a small carved token, wood polished smooth by time, shaped like a feather. For protection, he said. For when the world forgets you again. I tucked it into my coat pocket. Thank you. He gave a small smile. Thank you for proving faith still has value. I mounted the mare, tipped my hat to the three of them, and turned toward the open plains. The wind smelled of sage and rain. The sky went on forever. As the settlement disappeared behind me, I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. $12. That's all it had taken to change the course of more lives than I could count. And maybe, just maybe, to change mine. I thought of Ayanna's words echoing in my mind. You're good at standing up too. Maybe she was right. Maybe a man can learn new tricks, even after a lifetime of running. The road stretched ahead, wide and wild. Somewhere out there, new trouble waited, new wrongs that needed setting right. I'd been a drifter once. Now I figured I'd earned a new title, a man who couldn't look away anymore. The wind picked up again, carrying dust and memory in equal measure. I looked up at the endless blue and smiled. Guess that's the real deal after all, I said aloud, to no one in particular. Now let me ask you, partner, have you ever made a choice that cost you more than you expected, but gave you back something you didn't know you'd lost? Would you have taken that deal, for $12, a horse, and two strangers who changed everything? Or would you have ridden past pretending it wasn't your fight? Sometimes the smallest bargains hold the biggest reckonings. And sometimes $12 is the price a man pays to finally find out who he is.